Okay, let's jump right into this explainer and explore what has got to be one of the most chilling, bizarre, and just flat-out baffling unsolved mysteries in history. The tragic events at the Hinterkaifeck farmstead back in 1922. This isn't just your standard true crime story. It's a deep historical puzzle that completely challenges how we understand human psychology and the really dark secrets that isolated places can hold. So settle in, because we're going to unravel this century-old mystery together.
To really wrap our heads around this case, we have to start with the deeply unsettling question. What kind of killer slaughters an entire family and then decides to stay for breakfast? Because what makes this crime so terrifying isn't just the sheer brutality of the murder itself, but the completely surreal domestic routine the killer kept up while surrounded by 6 bodies. It defies all logic. Most culprits get out of there instantly, but as you'll see, this person did the exact opposite. Section title: The Haunting of Hinterkaifeck. Let's rewind to late March 1922 on a remote farmstead north of Munich, Germany, to see exactly how this nightmare began.
The patriarch of the family, Andreas Gruber, started noticing a really escalating series of terrifying anomalies. Just picture this. You walk outside and find fresh footprints in the snow leading from the dark forest straight to your barn, but there are absolutely no footprints returning. Then you start hearing heavy footsteps echoing from up in your own attic. You find a weird newspaper from a town you've never even been to, and your farmhouse keys just mysteriously vanish. All these warning signs clearly pointed to one terrifying fact: someone was actively lurking in the shadows of their own home.
And look, these weren't just easily dismissed, passing curiosities. They were incredibly sinister. In fact, they were so frightening that the family's maid abruptly quit her job and fled. She was absolutely convinced a ghost was terrorizing the farmstead. She just packed her bags and bolted, leaving the Gruber family completely alone with whatever, or whoever, was hiding in their house.
Section title: The Midnight Execution. This brings us to the really tragic events of March 31 in 1922, which just so happens to be the exact day a brave, but unfortunately very unlucky, new maid arrived to take the job.
Now, before we get into the events of that night, it's really important we respectfully note exactly who was in the house. We're looking at 3 generations of the Gruber family all living together. You had Andreas and Catilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, and her 2 young children, 7-year-old Catilia and 2-year-old Josef. And tragically, their brand new maid, Maria, who had literally just stepped through the front door that very afternoon. 6 lives, completely unaware of what was waiting for them in the dark.
As darkness fell, the intruder finally made their move. The killer used a chillingly cold, methodical strategy. First, they somehow managed to lure the 4 older family members, the 3 adult Grubers and young Catilia, out into the barn, one by one. Once they had them isolated, the attacker executed each victim using a custom mattock, which is this heavy pickaxe-like farming tool that actually belonged to the family. And it was only after the barn went completely silent that the killer made their way into the main house. This part really highlights the sheer, unsparing brutality of this person. Inside the house, the killer murdered the sleeping maid, Maria, right in her bed, and then turned the 2-year-old toddler, Josef, killing him in his crib. There was absolutely no hesitation. No survivors were left behind, not even the woman who just arrived that day or the youngest child. Section title: Living with the Dead. Now, the aftermath of this execution builds into what is easily the most disturbing phase of the entire case. Because this is where the story shifts from a brutal, horrific crime into something just entirely surreal. Forensic analysis mapped out a horrifying sequence of events, proving that the killer actually remained on the farmstead for at least 3 full days after the slaughter. Neighbors literally saw smoke rising from the chimney over the weekend. The intruder casually cooked and ate large meals in the family's kitchen, slept in their beds, and this is the most mind-boggling part: they consistently went out and fed the farm's cattle and livestock. A really critical factor in how this happened is the extreme isolation of the farmstead. Think about the massive amount of noise and daily movement required to run a farm and tend to all those animals. Yet the killer managed to maintain this macabre domestic routine completely undetected. The surrounding woods and the sheer distance from the nearby village provided this perfect, silent cloak for the killer to just move right in. Section title: Suspects and Dark Secrets. It wasn't until April 4th that the bodies were finally discovered by some really concerned neighbors. Naturally, the totally baffled Munich police immediately launched a massive investigation to find whoever did this.
So investigators obviously looked for a motive first, right? But robbery was immediately ruled out. Despite 6 methodical, brutal murders, large amounts of gold and cash were left completely untouched, literally just sitting out in the open in the farmhouse. The killer essentially ignored a small fortune, which proves the motive wasn't financial at all. It was deeply, terrifyingly personal.
Facing a wildly brutal crime with no clear motive, the police cast a massive net. They questioned well over 100 suspects. We're talking everyone from wandering transients and traveling merchants to local neighbors who maybe had a grudge. Yet, despite all of this extensive effort, not a single person could be definitively tied to that matic.
As the investigation dug deeper, speculation heavily pointed toward Victoria's former husband, Carl Gabriel. Now, Carl was known to be abusive, and although he was officially reported killed in the trenches of World War I years earlier, his body had never actually been recovered. So locals vigorously theorized that he had faked his own death, survived the war, and returned in secret to exact this horrifying revenge on his former family.
To fully grasp the context of this investigation, we also have to look at the persistent local rumors regarding some very dark family dynamics. It was widely whispered around town that there was an incestuous relationship between the patriarch, Andreas, and his daughter, Victoria. Investigators suspected that if these rumors were true, it could have easily provoked someone who knew their secrets intimately, maybe an outraged community member or a jealous former lover, resulting in an extreme honor killing.
Section title: Inside the Killer's Mind. For our final section, let's analyze the psychological profile of this perpetrator and the absolute logistical nightmare of the evidence they left behind.
Remember those footprints in the snow we talked about earlier? Well, they prove the killer was an attic stalker, literally living directly above the family's heads for days prior to the attack, which really forces us to ask, how did they manage such incredible, nerve-wracking stealth, navigating a creaky wooden farm attic, slipping down to steal food, and just casually reading newspapers while a family of 6 went about their daily lives below? It requires a level of patience, silence, and just absolute audacity that is so deeply unsettling to even think about.
And then, of course, we have the aftermath. The stark contrast between the sheer bloodlust of the midnight execution and the careful, diligent nurturing of the farm animals immediately afterward is a psychological anomaly. It completely baffles profilers to this day. Was it a fellow farmer who just couldn't bear to see animals starve, even after slaughtering human beings? Or was it someone playing out a twisted, sickening fantasy of taking over the family's life entirely?
Despite the massive volume of suspects, the huge police effort, and the incredibly bizarre trail of evidence left behind, this case was never solved. The file remains a dark, wide-open chapter in history. All the witnesses are long gone, the farmstead itself was demolished years ago, and the true identity of the person who wielded that matic remains completely unknown.
The legacy of Hinterkaifeck is a truly chilling reminder of the unknown. Was the killer a vengeful figure from the family's dark past? Or just a deeply disturbed stranger who decided to move in? I want to leave you with this final thought. Tonight, when you lock your doors, ask yourself, who might already be inside?